Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight.
You.
Excited to be here. My name's Jordan Moy. I'm the Sustainability Education Officer at North Sydney Council. And this workshop has been organised by Willoughby City Council in partnership with North Sydney. And we've decided to run this webinar because strata buildings in Australia consume 7% of the national electricity grid, which equates to an equivalent spend of about 1.7 billion on electricity each year. So there's a real opportunity for strata to make significant cost savings and to achieve some environmental benefits from that as well. Both councils have a large amount of apartments in each LGA, and in Willoughby it's nearly 50%, and North Sydney it's nearly 75% of dwellings are apartments. Before we begin, I'd also just like to both Willoughby City Council and North Sydney Council acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Cammeraygal people, and acknowledge their connections to land, waters, and community. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including those who may be in attendance today. Yeah, so thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Before we start into the actual presentation, just like to run a couple of quick polls to sort of gauge where everyone's from to start off with. So if you wouldn't mind, just this is a quick one just to see whether you're in North Sydney, Willoughby, or logging in from another suburb. Should pop on your screen now. So just a quick question about where you're from. Okay, we'll end it in a couple of seconds. 3, 2, 1. Great. Thanks, everyone. So that looks like 50% in North Sydney tonight, which is great. 19% in Willoughby and 33% in other. So thank you for that. Okay, and then we've got one more poll just to gauge the type of strata you live in. So launching that now. Are you living in townhouse, villa, low rise, medium rise, or high rise? We'll give everyone a 5 seconds or so to register your result. Okay, fantastic. So ending the poll in 3, 2, 1. Thanks, everyone. So it's pretty much low rise, medium rise, 30%, 38 and 31%. Townhouse or villa, 17, and high rise, 13. So good to know. Thank you, everyone, for completing the polls. So without further ado, I'd just like to introduce the presenter for the webinar tonight. It's Brent Clark, who is the CEO and founder of strata energy consultancy Wattblock. Wattblock has assisted apartment building, housing, and over 75,000 residents with solar, EV charging, energy efficiency over the last 7 years. Brent has worked with 9 local councils, 7 universities, 2 state governments on making strata buildings smarter. He has degrees in science, law, and applied finance, MBA, and is accredited NABERS apartment building assessor. So yeah, fantastic skills. Brent's been working with both of our councils over a number of years now. So we're really pleased to have him tonight. Thanks for joining us, Brent.
Thanks so much, Jordan, and great to be here. And welcome to Apartment Solar and Electric Vehicle Charging. So we've got quite a bit to go through tonight. It's broken into two sections. We'll start with solar for apartment buildings, and then we'll move on to EV charging for apartment buildings. And following that, we'll be able to take questions. We just ask that people only put the questions in through the chat function, and Jordan will moderate those at the end after we've done the formal presentation, and we'll get through as many of those as we can. So I won't read through all the contents. I'll just get straight into the solar section. So first of all, the overall objective we're looking at is to complete the electrification of strata buildings. And you might have heard terms like electrify everything from people such as Saul Griffiths, who's written books such as The Big Switch. And basically, this is transitioning our apartment blocks to all the technologies that you see on the screen here tonight. But solar and batteries are pivotal to this electrification of the apartment buildings because they will not only lower the cost of all the electrical items running in these buildings, but they'll also improve resilience of the apartment buildings over time. And also electric vehicles will be in the second half of this webinar tonight. So they're the two focus points: solar photovoltaic and batteries, and electric vehicle charging that we'll be looking at as part of the overall electrification of apartment buildings to increase their sustainability. So we're going to look at 4 different solar models that can apply on apartment buildings. And here we can see on the screen a 1 kilowatt individual solar system for an apartment. So this is the simplest way to do solar if you are in a townhouse or a villa style strata building, where usually you've got quite a large roof space for each of the townhouses or villas in the strata building. And it's been done once or twice that I know of on low-rise buildings, which are say 3 stories high. But basically this model of doing individual solar systems works in that townhouse or villa style of apartment building predominantly. And everyone's got their own individual solar panels on, typically on the roof above their townhouse or villa, and it connects to their private townhouse or villa apartment meter, and it can feed into the grid. You've got your own inverter converting the DC off the panels to AC for use inside your townhouse or villa, and also your own individual smart meter will be feeding into the grid, and you'll be getting some solar export revenue through that feed in. So that's individual solar systems, and that's basically for townhouse or villa. Now, the second way to do solar in apartment buildings, which is actually the most common model for apartment buildings to do solar at this point in time, is a solar system that's for the common property and the common or house services, which could include the lifts, the lighting, pool, ventilation systems for foyers, or in high-rise, you've got aircon. And the solar system on these apartment buildings is feeding the common load through the common area meter. And again, if there's any surplus that's not immediately used inside the building, then that can export back out into the grid and create some feed-in revenue, which goes to the owner's corporation and is reflected in the strata financial accounts. So that is the most common form of doing solar in an apartment building in not only Sydney Metro, but across Australia at this point in time. And it's been done like this in places such as Artarmon since about 2013. So for at least 10 years, we've been having common area solar systems being installed. Now, here we have a case study from Willoughby, and this is from 16 Freeman Road in Chatswood. And you have an example of a 30 kilowatt solar system for the common areas of that apartment building. And Brian Peck was the Strata committee member who championed this as the sustainability champion to get this in. He then followed it up by converting the common hot water plant for the building from gas over to an electric heat pump, which is another item of that electrification of apartment buildings. And so that's a really great local case study with assistance from Willoughby Council, and we'll go down to North Sydney Council as well, the other co-sponsor of tonight's webinar. And this is 20 Ross Street in Wollstonecraft. And again, you've got for a much smaller building, this is just 5 lots. You've got a 10 kilowatt solar system for the common areas. And after the Owners Corporation put in the solar system, then they also moved and did the same thing and replaced a common gas hot water plant with an electric heat pump to continue that process of electrification and moving off gas and reducing the carbon emissions of the building, as well as lowering the costs of not only common area electricity, but lowering the costs of hot water into each of the apartments. And to give you a little bit of an idea as to where you can get hot water costs down to after you've got solar PV and heat pump, some of these buildings, residents are paying like maybe $200 a year for their hot water, compared to some other apartment buildings where people might be paying like $1,200 just for their hot water in their private apartments each year. So really great financial savings for the buildings that push through and do this. So back to the next form of solar on an apartment building. So an innovative company from Melbourne called Illume Energy has created what's called the Illume SolShare. And what this product does is for multi-tenant buildings, it's able to have a single solar system on the roof. And the Illume SolShare is a solar sharing gateway that actually measures and diverts solar power through different unit loads. It can also divert solar through the common load, it's reading the consumption profile of all the meters that are connected to it continually throughout the day and diverting the solar to those that need it most. At the end of the month, it runs a reconciliation, and if someone's a little bit behind in terms of getting a fair or equitable share of solar, the algorithm rebalances the amount of solar that's pushed through all the meters so that it makes it completely fair and equitable across all the participants in the building. And people still have a choice of having any energy retailer of their choosing, and all people that have a smart meter, which is necessary for this setup, will also get feed-in revenue through solar export, where they're not able to consume their fair share of solar immediately inside their individual apartment. So we'll just jump over to Warren Street in Ryde. And here is an apartment complex. There are 17 apartments here. For each 15 apartments, you need an extra one of these SolShare boxes. And you can see there are 2 inverters here as well. And this 25 kilowatt solar sharing system is sharing solar power into each of the 17 apartments at this particular site. Now, there's one other model which is really quite rare. I'll I'll say that my guess is that there's probably less than 1,000 apartment buildings in New South Wales that have an embedded electrical network in them out of 84,000 residential strata schemes in New South Wales at this point in time. But embedded networks are microgrids where you have a gate meter in front of all the other meters for the apartments and the common areas. And this gate meter is basically an intersection point between the microgrid of the apartment complex and the national electricity grid. And it is possible to also have a solar system on a building with an embedded network that is sharing solar power into all the meters that are in that building, the apartment meters and the common area meters. And I'll give you an example. The first residential building to do this was actually in the City of Sydney area. It was Sydney University Housing, and they did it back in 2015. And they did this 30 kilowatt solar system with 42 kilowatt hours of batteries, these small little punnets on the wall here. And they did that on top of an embedded electrical network. And they probably got their payback by last year on that particular project. If you were to do that project in 2023, it'd be a lot cheaper than it actually was back in 2015. Now, what we're going to do here is just go through a couple of steps to determine the applicability of solar to your apartment building. So the things that we recommend that you do, check your roof condition and access to the roof. Is there a lift overrun, and can you walk out of fire stairs onto the roof, or is there a hatch? Or are you going to need to crane solar panels up or use a cherry picker or a scissor lift? Is there any shading from other apartment buildings or any shading from items, plant and equipment that's on the roof or trees next to the building? What's the state of your switchboard? Do you have smart meters in the building? And the important metric is, do you have 8 square meters of roof space per lot that you could consider doing an individual or shared solar system on the apartment building roof? If not, you might want to be focusing on the common area solar system. Now, the next thing is, let's assume that we're looking at our common area usage. If we look at our common area electricity bill, remember solar only shines during the day. So you might divide the average daily kilowatt hours off the bill in half to get the approximate consumption during the sunny part of the day. And then you can divide this number by a rule of thumb of 4 to get the size of solar system needed in kilowatts. And that is because each kilowatt of solar in Sydney generates about 4 kilowatt hours of energy per day. Now, then if you go on and you assume each solar panel is a 500 watt panel and physically takes 2 meters by 1 meter of roof space, you can multiply the size of the solar system in kilowatts by 4 to get the square meters required. And then see if you've got that amount of square meters available on the north, east, or west facing roof space. And just avoid putting panels on a south facing roof. So that's, and we'll send this out to all the participants afterwards, so you don't have to scribble this down. You'll be able to go through it in your own time. Now, looking at cost and payback of solar, the average cost per watt on strata buildings is about $1.40, including GST. But this is a little bit different by building type. If you're low rise, medium rise, or high rise, it gets more expensive on the higher buildings because you might have more lifting costs and you might have more cable run costs back to meters that might be on the ground floor. So the payback on solar systems on strata is typically between 7 and 11 years. And what to look for in a solar installer? First of all, are they Clean Energy Council accredited, CEC accredited? Have they been around for a number of years? Do they have a local office and phone number? Can you speak to previous customers where they've installed on strata buildings? and get a view of their service level. And importantly, you need a solar installer that will visit the block. Don't go with solar installers that quote remotely. And do they do the work themselves or subcontract it out? Now, there's also a link here. You can look at the top 35 solar installers for Strata. Now, here's a case study. This is an apartment block in Camperdown, and we'll come back and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but they used the New South Wales Sustainability Infrastructure Amendment to the New South Wales Strata Schemes Management Act to approve solar and batteries with a special levy. And so they've now got a 38 kilowatt solar system and 26.6 kilowatt hours of batteries. You can see the batteries here are the modular ones from a company called BYD that also makes electric vehicles. Now, just to give you a little bit of an idea, this is now the Strata buildings that are in the North Sydney local government area with a green pin, which have solar installed on them. This one here with the lighter green actually has solar and batteries installed into it. And if we come up here into the Willoughby area, this is a geoscape picture of Chatswood, and the buildings which have solar on them are coloured in yellow, and the case study building that we spoke about at 16 Freeman Road down here with the 30 kilowatts of solar and the heat pump is located here. Now we're at the end of the solar section, and we're going to move into EV charging. And again, we're going to be looking at some different models for doing EV charging in Strata. We're actually going to be looking at more EV charging models than we did look at solar models. Now, it's important to understand that, again, with EV charging, not all our Strata buildings are the same size, and we may need different solutions for different size Strata buildings. And think, you know, are you from a townhouse or a villa? A low-rise 1960s or 1970s walk-up, a medium-rise, or a high-rise, or even a super high-rise. Probably there's someone from a super high-rise here. Now, as we look through these scenarios, the earlier scenarios match more to the smaller type of Strata buildings, and some of the later scenarios are more for the larger type of Strata buildings. So model number one. Now, some people don't realize that it's perfectly possible to charge an electric vehicle from a standard power outlet, the same type of power outlets that you have inside your apartment at this point in time, 10 amp power outlets. The charging speed from those power outlets, might only be 8 or 9 kilometers of range each hour. But keep in mind, the average commute in Sydney is only about 25 kilometers per day. And people always think they need much faster charging in an apartment building than they really need. And so it's possible to use a general power outlet that might even be located in a visitor car parking space in your apartment building and connected to the common area meter and charge an electric vehicle. You might have to have a mechanism in place for reimbursing the owner's corporation for the electricity which you take. So one of those mechanisms is to sign what's called an end user agreement with the owner's corporation, and they might stipulate, the price at which you've got to reimburse per kilowatt hour, and they might also put some rules around how many hours you can put the electric vehicle there and charge it off one of those common area power points in, say, a visitor car parking area. Now, in some of our we're moving on to model number 2. In some of our apartment buildings, there are general power outlets in the individual lot cages inside the underground basement car park or inside individual lift-up garages in the older style of building. And these are sometimes connected to the common area meter, and they can also be used to charge an EV. There's just one thing to keep in mind is typically those circuits that were installed were at 20 amps. And so you can probably charge 2 electric vehicles on the same circuit simultaneously before you trip that circuit. You definitely won't be able to charge a third electric vehicle on one of those general power outlet circuits if they're not on their own circuit. Now we'll jump down to Milson's Point, and this is an example of a strata building that actually has a large number of general power outlets in the underground basement car park. They're in storage cages, which are close to where the vehicles are. And you can see in this photo here, a $25 plug-in power meter that was bought from Bunnings. And that's just plugged into the general power outlet, and it measures the kilowatt hours of each charging session from this Hyundai Kona electric vehicle. So that's one method. Some vehicles that have mobile phone apps, like say a Tesla, actually record the kilowatt hours on the mobile phone app for each charging session. So you don't even need to pay $25 for one of those plug-in meters to record the kilowatt hours. Okay, model number 3. This is using a general power outlet in an individual lot cage in the underground basement car park, which is connected to the private lot meter to charge the EV. Now, where this has been done, it would have cost the developer more to actually do this, to connect those power points up to the individual lot electricity meters. But this is perfectly fine for charging electric vehicles. If you're in this situation, which happens in some townhouses, you then have to manage the load because, you might have an air conditioner, dryer, washing machine, oven. And if you're running all those things during the middle of summer and you're running your EV and it's connected off your private apartment meter, you might be getting close to the capacity limit on your own apartment meter. So, but here's an example from the North Sydney area. This is a townhouse complex. You've got underground car park with cages, lift-up cages for all the townhouses, but inside each cage is a power outlet that's connected on the private apartment meter. And then you can just use this cable that usually comes with the electric vehicle, plug it into that and charge the electric vehicle that way. Now, we'll move on to model number 4. So this is using a shared charge point in a visitor car parking space to charge the electric vehicle with billing via either a smartphone app or an RFID card. Now, the owner's corporation has to make a decision, to actually install one of these, what are called level 2 charge points. Level 2 charge points are typically capable of charging from 7 kilowatt to 22 kilowatt, or in amps from, say, single phase 16 amps, or single phase 32 amps, or some of them 3-phase 32 amps. However, it's pretty rare to be able to allow 3-phase charging in any apartment building. And at 3-phase 32 amps, you'd be getting about 100 kilometers of range put into the vehicle for every hour of charging. And as we saw earlier today, with the average driving distance of 25 kilometers per day for a commute to and from work, people really don't need that speed of charging inside a strata building. So it would be very rare. Some high-end small apartment blocks with, say, 6 units might have 3-phase for all the apartments in, for the individual lots. But Most of the time, we'll just set the expectations that people that are in a strata building are going to be charging at single phase, and typically, maybe single phase 32 amp in a shared visitor spot, or single phase 16 amp in a private lot space. Now, here's an example. Famous building, the Harry Seidler building, the Horizon building, Darlinghurst. They converted 2 of their visitor car parking spots. They installed bollards so that they could actually, control access to these charging spots. This is the charging station with 2 ports on it, so it can be used either on this spot or this spot. And you pay with your credit card. And so that's an example of converting some visitor spots to being dedicated shared electric vehicle spots. Now we're going to have a look at model number 5. And this is using a charge point in an individual lot car space connected to an individual apartment meter, which is located in the car park area. Now, I say in the car park area because there is an example of a building in St Leonard's where an individual ran a cable from their apartment meter on the 6th floor of the building and ran the new cable down through the 6 floors and then a long way along the car park to get to their electric vehicle. And after that was done once, the facilities manager said, we're not going to allow that to happen again. And as we move into an area where there's going to be more fire regulation coming in around EV charging, there are many good reasons for not allowing people to run cables out of the car park area, which is one self-contained fire zone, into the residential parts of the building, which have a different fire rating from the car parking area. But if you're a strata building that happens to have the meter room and all the apartment meters in that meter room off the car park area, then that is something that can be considered in your apartment building. Now, here's an example. We go to one of the finger wharves down at Piermont. Here's an example of a Tesla with a charge point, and that conduit just runs along the roof over to the metering cabinet, which is inside the car park area. And then there's a breaker, and that's connected to the individual apartment meter. So that's an example there. Now we're going to have a look at model number 6 for charging in a strata building. So this is starting to become more like what we would start to describe as an EV charging backbone. And this term, you'll probably hear a little bit more about what is an EV charging backbone. Well, the term backbone comes from having this cable tray running through the car park. So you can imagine that's the spine going down your spine, and then you have these distribution boards, and that and you can sort of think of those distribution boards in conjunction with the cable tray as being a spinal cord with and that builds up this backbone for level 2 EV charging throughout the car park area. Now, this model here, typically these EV charging backbones are connected to the common area or the house lights electricity meter. Now, one model of getting the measurements of how much electricity goes into each of the electric vehicles when it's coming off a backbone connected to the common area or house lights meter is to use data cables as well to each charge point, which relay the amount of kilowatt hours back to a billing system so that person can be billed. So here's an example of a cable tray that's actually passing all the car spaces down this particular row. So as time goes on, we'll start to see more of these cable trays in passing all the car spaces in our apartment building basement car parks. So let's move on to model number 7. Now, this is, again, what we would call a backbone model. an EV charging infrastructure that can be set up to charge a lot of vehicles in the private lot car spaces. The difference between this model and the last model is instead of running data cables to each of the charge points, in addition to power cables, you only run a power cable to the charge point, and then the charge point is Wi-Fi enabled, and then you have a Wi-Fi network set up through the basement car park, and the charge points relay via Wi-Fi the amount of kilowatt hours that go into each charging session into a billing system, and then payment for that comes off the credit card of the individual EV owner. And the billing system aggregates all those payments from the charging session and deposits that back into the Strata bank account on a periodic basis, say every 3 months. Okay, so here we have an example of a Tesla Model X and a charge point here, an isolator, conduit run onto a cable tray, going back to this house distribution board. And you can actually see the breaker for the Tesla charge point, a single phase breaker there as part of the EV charging backbone in that building. So model number 8. Now we're looking at using a charge point. Again, this is an example of an EV charging infrastructure backbone. So we're looking at providing charging into all the individual lots. It's very similar to the last 2 models that we've looked at, but instead of using a cable tray and running all the cables to the electrical cables to the charge points along the cable tray, we're actually using a product called a flat cable, or sometimes it's called a bus duct or a bar cable. And you can actually hang multiple charge points off this flat cable. And we'll just jump to show you a picture of what that looks like. So, sorry. This flat cable is laid by the Owners Corporation behind all the car spaces in the car park area. And initially there's no charge points connected to it. And then as each person buys an electric vehicle, then an electrician chops the cable and puts a connection device on, and then puts the charge point coming off. But then power keeps flowing through that cable, and over time you chop it in more places and add more charge points into it. And that is an alternative to running the cable tray in front of the car spaces. Obviously, you can't do this if you've got storage cages or you don't have a flat wall behind the where the cars are parked. You can run this on the roof. You can use it outdoors as well. So now we're up to model number 9, and this is the difference was you could still run a data cable to each charge point on that previous model. This model is using the flat cable and also using the Wi-Fi for not only for billing, but for software load balancing, where the calculations around how fast the charge points can charge in every, say, half-hour interval are actually calculated in the cloud off-site from the building, and then sent back to the building, and the instructions are given to each charge point for the next 30 minutes. You can charge at this particular speed. And you could even have charge points on different floors of different basement car parks, charging at different variable speeds for different half-hour blocks, based on algorithms around how much charging needs to be done, and in the future based on predicted driving patterns. These systems will start to learn how much you charge on a Monday and how much you charge on a Saturday and a Sunday, and then start to dynamically allocate charging speed to each of the charge points that are in this network, where all the charge points are communicating with each other, and you've got variable charging speeds at different times through the night, where the charging speeds are also being slowed down when there's more activity in the building, when there are more lifts and air conditioning running. And then when the building's more idle, the charging speeds actually get faster. And that way you're not overloading the building at any point in time. So there we are. We've just gone through 9 different models for EV charging. Now, we're just going to mention Wi-Fi for car parking areas. And some people are thinking, well, do we really want to set up a Wi-Fi network in our basement car park or in our outdoor car park if we've got outdoor car parking around our strata building? Well, the uses of Wi-Fi are many. First of all, the Wi-Fi connected charge points allow you to eliminate running data cables to the charge points. So instead of having 2 cables to each charge point, one for power, one for data, you only have 1 cable. Now, a lot of vehicles, such as Tesla, Mercedes, VW, when they get here, now download software updates via Wi-Fi into the vehicles. And while you might be able to get smaller software updates through a 4G, 5G SIM card that's in the car, the larger updates may need Wi-Fi to download, say, full self-driving package. So the vehicles themselves can connect to a Wi-Fi network. Now, the next thing is what we noticed is there's a habit that a lot of people that live in strata buildings have, which is when they're out on the road, they're driving around and they're on a mobile phone call while they're driving. And then they get back to the strata building and they're about to drive into the basement car park, but they know that they're going to lose mobile phone reception. And so there's this habit, and I'm pretty sure that there's people on the call that have done this, that actually temporarily park with the engine running, idling in the driveway outside the basement car park, ending a phone call before they open the roller door and take the car inside. Well, if you have a Wi-Fi network inside that basement car park, the modern phones can automatically switch that mobile phone call from a 4G or 5G call onto the Wi-Fi calling, and you can continue talking on the phone until you drive 3, 4, 6 levels down a basement car park and park, and you can keep that mobile phone call going while you walk to the lift and finish it off. And that's a benefit to people that have EVs, but also a benefit to people that still drive internal combustion engine vehicles. So there is a business case that stacks up because it's providing a benefit to everyone in the building. And then finally, people have started saying, well, what if we have shared EV charge points in the basement car park, and we have an issue with people overstaying a 4-hour limit doing charging? Well, you can actually put a Google Nest Wi-Fi camera pointed at the visitor car parking space very cheaply and record people that overstay in a shared visitor car parking space. What's a new distribution look like in the car park area? Usually they're these orange or grey boxes that can be installed onto the wall of the apartment of the car parking area. And now we're going to have a look at a couple of case studies around EV charging. So this is the Altair at Potts Point, 165 car spaces. They installed 6 new distribution boards. They put cable trays past every space. They used a dynamic load balancing system, Wi-Fi network, and also the Owners Corporation decided to create a subsidy model so that it cost exactly the same for every apartment owner to get EV charging set up in their own private lot car parking space. And that's because if, for example, someone is right next to one of those new distribution boards, the cable run might be 3 meters. If they're at the other end of the car park, it might be 60 meters away. And the difference is, copper is getting more and more expensive, but You know, the difference for installing a charge point could vary from $1,500 of cabling and labor to $6,000 of cabling and labor before you pay for your charge point, depending on the cable run distance. So you can do an accounting overlay, which is nothing to do with technology, nothing to do with technical details of anything. It's just pure accounting by the strata scheme, and the owners corporation can equalize the cost of each charge point install. So here's an example of the cable tray going past each space. Here's an example of an EV box charge point. And in the switch room, you've got this box, which is a dynamic load balancing equipment. It's monitoring the complete load coming into the building every second, and then sending out messages to adjust the charging speed for all the charge points so that it doesn't overload the building. Okay, let's move to the Richmont building at Pyrmont. Again, 106 car spaces. Now, the interesting thing here is they have 12 visitor spaces, and 10 of those already had bollards on them and were controlled and needed to be booked with the booking system, you know, before they introduced EV charge points. What they thought they would do is sometimes in an apartment building, there's some resistance to losing a visitor car parking spot to EV charging. Well, if you've got 12 visitor car parking spaces and you install 12 EV charge points in every visitor space, then you don't lose any visitor car parking spaces. You just ended up enabling every visitor car parking space for EV charging. So that's one other way to look at the problem. And, you know, if we look at St Leonard's Square, a Mirvac development, there's 20 shared EV charge points in St Leonard's Square. But the Richmont building here, they've got 10 Tesla Generation 3 charge points. With software load balancing, they've got 2 ChargeFox charge points with core hardware load balancer, and they've got 3 network boxes. And we'll just show you a couple of photos. Here's some visitor charge points. They've got charge points mounted on a bollard. And here's an example of a new distribution board. Here's an example of a networking box that goes next to the distribution board if you're running data cables from the charge point into this networking box. And there'll be like 32 connection points, so you can have 32 charge points connecting the data cables into that. The Tesla system is a Wi-Fi system, so it doesn't need the data cables. This is the Zinc building at Alexandria. It's got solar-powered EV charging in the strata building. So they've now got a 25 kilowatt common area solar system on the roof. And in the first instance, all the charge points connect to the house lights meter. So during the day, you could actually get solar power into your electric vehicle. They've only got 30 car spaces. They got 10 of these charge points, and there isn't a concept in this building of a charge point being owned by one particular lot. The cables are long enough that you can actually use them at the same charge point for more than one car parking space. So the 10 charge points can actually support 30 car spaces, and the billing and cost recovery is in place there through the Tesla management system. And then when you get to high rise, for example, the Chatswood interchange on top, the 3 high rise on top of the train station in Chatswood, you know, multiple levels of basement car park. This is the aerial view looking at the car park and how you would have to run the new cable trays, the new Wi-Fi repeaters, and put new distribution boards into the basement car park for that. So we're just going to move on in terms of getting this approved in your strata building. So in February 2021, the New South Wales government made solar and EV charging and a whole lot of other things easier to get passed through your owners corporation. And what they did was they created this sustainability amendment to the New South Wales Strata Schemes Management Act. And if you're doing any project that's in this list, which includes today, we've looked at reducing the consumption of energy with solar or batteries. or facilitating the use of sustainable forms of transport, such as EV charging, then it lowers the voting threshold that you need in an owner's corporation. Prior to this, you would have needed a special resolution at a voting threshold of 75% of unit entitlements. The one thing I'll just point out is this legislation also changes the voting threshold for taking out finance to do any of these items. So if you can get a solar power purchase agreement, a type of solar finance for a solar or battery system, to take out that finance or taking out a strata loan for any of these projects, the voting threshold is also lowered for taking out the finance. So what this did was it reduced it from a special resolution at 75% threshold to a sustainability infrastructure resolution at a 50% threshold based on unit entitlements. Now, keep in mind, this is only based on people that are present at an AGM or an EGM, either in person or via proxy, and are entitled to vote. For example, those that aren't paid up on their strata levies can't vote. And it's only from that group of people that actually are present. And you're looking at the unit entitlements of those that are present. Do those that are voting against doing a resolution for solar or the EV, do all those unit entitlements amount to more than 50% of the people that voted, or don't they? If they don't get more than 50% against, then this motion will pass. And because of the way that it's actually framed, you actually could have a minority of people based on unit entitlements voting for, but as long as there's not more than 50% against the motion, if you've got some people abstaining, then the motion would still pass. Okay, a note on the strata committee archetypes that are needed to get these projects over the line. So we call them the bean counter, the engineer, and the sustainability champion. So what we found in strata buildings that have been successful in getting these projects over the line, you have at least 2 out of these 3 people on the strata committee. Ideally, you'd have all 3 of them. You're in a good position if you've got 2 of them. If you're the only person and you're only fulfilling one of these roles on the strata committee, then you've got a tough job ahead of you. So what you want to do is enlist one of the other archetypes to join with you, create a subcommittee that can go off and explore the solar or the EV charging project and bring it back. And the time span for these projects is typically 18 months to 2 years to get them over the line in strata. Now, one extra thing just to help you sell this into your owner's corporation is last year, domain.com.au that does the real estate listings ran analysis over every listing in every state in Australia, broken out by houses and by units. And they looked at the keywords that were in the real estate listings, and they looked for keywords like solar, etc., that were written into the actual real estate listings. And they found there that those real estate listings that had those energy features, on average, if they were a unit, sold for $72,000 more than the units that didn't have those features. So the question now is not with solar, it's not just about payback. It's does everyone in the building want to increase the property value of their unit by $72,000? I'll give you an example of an apartment building in Glebe that had 24 units. And basically they looked and they said, look, we can do solar and a heat pump. It'll only cost us $100,000. It'll generate $1.7 million worth of capital value across our 24 apartments. We'll do this project. So that's what's changed in the last 12 months is before that, people were always focused on payback as being the sole criteria for, say, solar. Now with things like EV charging, basically you will get the market in apartment buildings split in two, where you've got the haves and the have-nots. And as more people have electric vehicles, they won't want to go and buy in an apartment building that doesn't have electric vehicle charging. So if you want to get on top of the wave and be with the haves, you need to start planning the EV charging infrastructure for your apartment building. Now, we're at the end of the formal part of the presentation. And what we will do is I'll hand back to Jordan and we can go through some of the questions.
Thank you, Brent. And thanks for walking us through both the solar and EV charging models. It's just exciting to see what was sort of a fringe implementation for both of those things move into the mainstream, and we're starting to see case studies in Willoughby and North Sydney and greater take up across the strata space. So I mean, it's just fantastic to see. Really exciting. I think in terms of the question, we've got a lot of really good questions. We might walk through some of the solar first and then address the EVs at the end. There was a question, $1 million question about the what do you do about getting committee members? I suppose you mentioned getting certain skills, but what are the ways you can get some committee members who might not be on board with strata initiatives? What can you do to change it?
Yeah, so one thing that not everyone knows in strata, if you're an owner occupier or an owner investor, you have a right to put a motion on any AGM or EGM that's upcoming, provided that you know that you give enough advance notice. You can't put the motion on the day of the AGM or the EGM. So if you're on the strata committee, then you know when the AGM is. You will also know if there's an extraordinary general meeting being held. And so, for buildings that don't have electronic voting in place, you would still need to get your motion to your strata manager, say 25 days before the AGM or the EGM. But the first thing is, remember, you can keep chipping away. So if you're an owner, you can put up a motion at every AGM or every EGM. If you then join the strata committee, you've got more warning about when these are coming. If you join the strata committee and you become a chairperson or a secretary, then you actually have the right to call an EGM out of schedule. So those eventually, if you can make it to be a chairperson and you can take on that load of that community service as well, or a secretary, then you actually can call an EGM at any time for the building. And so that's one method. I would also suggest leading with the property valuation method now. And I would also, that's something that just doesn't go away. So everyone who's invested in a property wants an extra 72,000 of capital value on their property. So approach it like that. The other thing is, if you've got a solar system, the other thing is the capital works funds that the strata buildings have. Quite often, these are in bank accounts that in a lot of cases are getting 0% interest, and really, even if they're in a term deposit, they're only getting 2% interest. A solar project, we've seen, if you convert the energy savings back to an effective interest rate, can be as high as 14%. So what you need is, you need to ask people, if we could efficiently allocate our capital that's sitting there in the capital works fund, giving us a really poor return, and transform that from 0% to 14%, would you be interested in doing that? So there are a couple of ideas.
Yeah, fantastic. And I suppose with the sustainability amendment that you mentioned before as well, whether some people are against it, sort of, as long as you can get 50% or above at the meeting, then it can go through.
Yeah, look, in a block of 100, you might only get 20 people turning up to an AGM, and that basically, you know, can you get 11 people? If you've got 11, they can't beat you.
Yep, love it. There was a question from Oksana about waterproofing membranes on roofs. Can you still add solar if you've got that?
On a waterproofing membrane, yes, you can. So there's two models. Recently, a building in Des Moines installed a ballast weighted solar system on top of one of those membranes that doesn't penetrate the membrane at all. It's actually weighted down by bricks in the racking system. So you've got that ballast model for weighting down the solar with no penetration. We call it safe solar. And then or alternatively, you can punch it through the waterproof membrane, chemset the anchor point, and re-waterproof around the anchor point for the solar system.
Yep, fantastic. I think most of the other questions in the chat, you covered that in your presentation in terms of solar. So we might move on to EV charging. Cameron asks about, are there sort of systems that can calculate when you're getting the feed in with solar outputs, and does that calculate that? And then also, I suppose, the cheaper tariffs when you go at nighttime.
Yep. So yes, there are now. So at least two companies. So EVSE has been doing research with CSIRO into diverting excess solar that would have been fed into the grid into EV charging, and also Jet Charge with their core load management system can also do solar diversion. If you're in a townhouse setup and you've got your own private apartment solar system, you might want to buy, say, a Solar Edge home energy hub or a Zappi charge point that have that ability for diverting solar into the EV rather than putting it back into the grid.
Yep, great. Okay, just going through some of the questions now. Where are we at? Few people asked for advice, so I'll pass on your details for that. Oh yes, Keith asked about the Altair. Are you able to provide sort of a ballpark investment for their setup? And can you just quickly remind us of that? What that is?
So those buildings, a couple of those case studies that we looked at, the Altair and the Richmond, like a ballpark is $130,000, $150,000 of EV charging infrastructure. To work it out for your own apartment building, the rule of thumb is $6,500 times the number of lots if you include the charge point and the last mile connection, like the total cost of fitting out every car space in the building is $6,500 per car space.
Yep, great. What about insurance implications for EV and solar? Does that change anything with insurance?
So it's not an issue with the solar. So you're not required to break out a special item like you would on your home contents insurance, like for a diamond ring if you've got a solar system. It's just included in your insurance for the building. Now, with the EV charging, you could expect perhaps a 5% increase in your premium if you start to have an EV charging infrastructure in the building. And the most draconian insurance policy that we've seen to date is if you've got more than 4 electric vehicles per floor of basement car park, that insurer will walk away and not insure your strata building. So maximum of 4 electric vehicles per car space per floor of basement car park was the worst in insurance treatment. And then there are some other things that have been suggested by insurance companies, like having foam retardant packs installed above the EVs, and some other things like signs to keep children away from EV charging areas and brightly lit areas for EV charging, if it's shared EV charging.
Interesting. Okay. So maybe check with your current insurer before going ahead with any works, and then also shop around, it sounds like. Yeah. Tim asked about, are you able to provide any templates for bylaws around solar or EVs?
Yes. So you can see this on the screen, the solar training course and this EV charging training course. If you go to module 10 of both of those training courses, you've got some sample bylaws around solar in the solar training course.
Right. Can you just quickly sort of talk us through that, the solar and EV training that you've got online that's available?
Yeah, so like there's been a lot of questions that people are asking, and they're the same questions coming from different strata schemes. So basically, as we get the questions coming in, we keep updating those training courses so that they're answering the questions. So there's even a 70 question quiz at the end of each of those training courses if you really feel game, to test how well you're getting through all the new learning.
Yeah. Is that something that the exec committee should do, all the members on that? So
definitely. Yeah, it's definitely a good thing for at least the people that are on a subcommittee for solar or EV charging. To at least read through and go through some of the videos that are up there to understand the different, the different challenges that you face, whether it's, the approval process, the insurance, the technical, the legal, all these factors come together. There's even a video on the 20 different stakeholders that could be involved in an EV charging infrastructure retrofit to an apartment building. So just learning who are the stakeholders. Like you need metering companies, electricity monitoring device companies. Maybe you've got a facilities manager, you've got a strata manager, you've got strata committee members. You might have a fire compliance company. You've got charge point importers. You've got electrical contractors. You've got insurance companies. You've got companies that provide automated bollard systems. You've got companies that specialize. Your painting company, if you want to paint the EV charging spot green and put one of those plug logos on it. Your sign making company, if you want a sign that says 4 hours maximum charging limit in this particular space. Booking systems for booking the charge points, billing and administration systems for capturing payment. These are the stakeholders. There's at least 20 of them that can be involved in an EV charging infrastructure retrofit.
So fairly comprehensive. So it's, how do most buildings then approach it? Do they hire a building manager? Do they manage it out through the exec committee, or how does it normally sort of play out?
Yeah, so the normal path, if we look at the solar path is a little bit different from the EV path. Normally, if it's EV, it's an EV owner turning up in the building and unable to charge in the building. That person starts lobbying a strata committee member or the strata manager, and the strata manager informs the strata committee member that this is now something that's an issue inside the building. So that's how the EV charging process gets started. The solar and the battery process is more like it usually comes from existing strata committee members that have an interest in not only maintaining the building, but for the strata buildings that have gotten their basic management problems under control, and they're in free flowing mode, and they've got large capital works funds. For example, there's some buildings out there that have $600,000 in the capital works fund at a very poor interest rate, and they're now moving to that optimizing capital allocation process to build unit holder value, a lot owner value within the strata scheme. So that's where the solar and the battery starts to emanate from, and the rising utility costs as well.
Yep. Oh, great. Danny asked about maintenance. And how much maintenance is required with solar and EV charging systems?
Yep. So maintenance on solar. Remember, the solar systems that everyone's installing these days now have remote monitoring systems, and you'll have a Wi-Fi connection to the inverter or the solar monitoring system. And so you actually can monitor the performance, and either the facilities manager or some strata committee members can look at a web page or a mobile phone app to check that the performance is good. And what that has done is, in the past, you might have had scheduled cleaning of the solar panels on an interval, but now you can see what the performance is like. You move to an on-demand model of cleaning the solar panels. You might be able to get, with cleaning the solar panels can be done by a roofer or even a cleaning company, doesn't need a solar installer. But you might, budget $12 per panel for a cleaning event, which
Is that something that's done annually, or?
Yeah, annually. Yeah, but maybe not even annually. It depends, how much leaf, bird poo, salt near the salt water, the profile of your building is. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Right.
EV charging maintenance. Okay, so basically a good practice is to get an electrician to check the charge points once per year. People are charging about $250 for a call out per charge point per year. And that is checking the RCD as well. Ongoing costs, most of the EV charging infrastructure companies are actually passing the bulk of the burden of the ongoing costs onto the individual EV owners rather than onto the owners corporation themselves. So, you might end up, if you've got some electricity monitoring systems in place, you might end up with, for example, there's at the Wandakaya estate in Wollstonecraft there, they've got 4 electricity monitoring devices, and there are SIM cards in each of those. And so you're paying a monthly SIM card fee, which is ongoing for the SIM cards in those monitoring devices. The other, as you move to a Wi-Fi model of EV charging, you can actually download software updates for load management without a technician coming out to the building. And as you move to Wi-Fi connected charge points, the Tesla Generation 3 can actually download software updates and firmware updates into itself over the Wi-Fi network without having a technician call out fee to update those charge points. But you'll get ongoing maintenance costs like, say, the Wi-Fi network dropping out at certain points in time. The Altair that we spoke about earlier actually has, because it's on a Wi-Fi model for EV charging, they actually have a primary NBN account for the owners corporation that is used by the EV charging system. In the event of a failover of that primary NBN internet account, it automatically switches over via a device to a 4G, 5G backup internet account so that the EV charging system can keep running if the primary NBN account goes down.
Okay, great. We might just do a couple more questions, I think, and then just wrap it up. So just looking, there was this a good question about security for EV charging points. What about if you have anyone unauthorized using them? How do you prevent that? What are other buildings have been doing around that?
Okay, so remember, most of the smart chargers that you would buy now, you actually can't activate power through them and into your vehicle unless you've got a smartphone with an app on the smartphone and you've already put your credit card into that app before you start the charging session and power flows through it. So there's not so much an issue around people from outside the building being able to steal power from a charge point. So you've got software systems, or you do have combinations, like, for example, there's one charge point out there where you can take an RFID card, but through your mobile phone app, the very first time you take this RFID card that maybe, say, your Opal card that's got a RFID on it, and you train your mobile phone app to know that that Opal card connects to your credit card. And every time you tap that Opal card on the charge point, it bills your credit card. Access control to the EV charge point. So there are buildings like out at Wentworth Point that have actually invested in automated bollard systems that are activated by a mobile phone app via Bluetooth. As you drive up, you don't have to get out of the car. You've got an app that uses Bluetooth to lower the bollard to drive into the EV charging spot, and that can't be accessed by someone who hasn't been given access to the mobile phone app for lowering the bollard to get into the EV charging space.
Great. Well, interesting. Okay, so final question we might just touch on was Ryan's about any state or local government grants or funding on offer.
Okay, so what's coming down the pipeline from the state government? $10 million has been allocated to EV charging infrastructure retrofits in apartment blocks that have more than 100 car spaces, and up to 125 apartment blocks will be able to register for that in the first tranche. That is for the backbone infrastructure. It doesn't count towards the charge points themselves. Then what you're starting to see is a couple of local councils, such as Ku-ring-gai or Randwick, putting out a little rebate or incentive for a shared EV charge point in a strata building. You might get, up to $2,000 from a couple of these councils towards a shared EV charge point in a strata building being installed, obviously not for a private lot owner.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. I would not just like to mention that, North Sydney Council will also be rolling out a rebate program in the new financial year. Might not be July the 1st, but either July or August we'll be rolling out that program as well. So that'll have significant support for strata as well. So thank you. Thanks, Brent, for a fantastic presentation. Before we sort of wrap up, there are just a couple of programs that I'd like to mention. For Willoughby residents, there's the High Neighbours, lost the link. Yeah, High Neighbours program. And that connects neighbours and residents in the buildings, so aimed at promoting neighbourly connections. Support and funding is available from Willoughby Council, and a toolkit for resources can be downloaded from the website. So if you're in Willoughby, it sounds like a fantastic opportunity. Please take that up. We'll also, and as I sent earlier, there was the free Willoughby, the free energy audits for Willoughby residents. So that's for commercial buildings, but they can provide some advice to strata if you're looking at installing solar as well. So that link was included in the chat, and we'll include both of those in the email follow-up as well. For North Sydney Council residents, we have the Future Proofing Apartment Program. Brent, how many audits or
250 apartment buildings in the North Sydney area have been in the program so far.
Fantastic. So that includes energy assessment, detailed reports with financial cases, Also can be support at strata meetings to communicate the benefits to other members, workshops and information sessions. So I included in the link in the chat earlier, also will include in the follow-up. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you, Brent, for a fantastic presentation, and thank you for everyone who's joined us and your excellent questions. Great to see so much interest in this space. Yeah, so tomorrow we'll send the email follow-up, which will include Brent's presentation, the links to council programs, the recording of the event, and also the evaluation. So if you wouldn't mind, just completing the evaluation takes a couple of minutes. We read it each and every comment. And that feedback helps to feeds back straight into our programs and helps us improve what we do. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Jordan. And thanks, Leanne from Willoughby Council as well for sponsoring tonight's event. Okay, good evening.
Thank you.